Hey there, Happy New Year and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete the first Rimworld episode of 2019, which is also more or less the 1-year anniversary episode. Just over a year ago we started this playthrough with our tribal colonist Cambia and not much else, and surprisingly today our small ice sheet colony is still going strong. Now before we jump into today's episode I have two small announcements to make. A few days ago, over the holidays, the channel surpassed 50,000 subscribers, and to celebrate I have decided to do a small giveaway of one copy of Rimworld. So if you have always wanted to play the game yourself, now is the chance. The giveaway is still open until Sunday the 6th of January. All you have to do to enter is leave a comment below my pinned comment on the 50,000 subscriber video. You can find a link to that video on screen right now as well as in the description. As part of the 50,000 subscriber celebration I have also made some t-shirts, one of which is actually designed specifically for this series. You can see the design on screen right now. There is also another more generic one available, and if you want to check that out there should now be another link on screen and once again also in the description. And with all of that out of the way, let's jump into today's episode. Last time we left off after finally recruiting our third colonist, so our small ice sheet mountain base is now occupied by Cambia, Cobra and Antonio. Regarding Antonio, we also still have the choice to use a healer mech serum on him, which would remove a scar on his arm. Now that scar is not impacting him too badly, however it is causing some minor pain and also slows down Antonio's work speed. As I had expected, your comments on this were mixed, but ultimately there was a majority in favor of using the serum. So let's go with that. I think it's a sensible thing to do. We will still have 2 doses lying around afterwards, and to quote a comment of user Dominik Topolsky on the last episode, it would make for a healthier, happier and faster colonist. So here we are, Antonio is fully healed and back up to full speed, so together with Cobra he can now start resowing some rice. By the way, I have also read your comments regarding the switch to potatoes, but we'll get to that later down the line in this episode. For now, we also have to make sure to turn the chemfuel generator back on. As you can see, with the arrival of winter it is getting darker and darker out on the ice sheet, so our solar panels will not do us much good. Still, we need every ounce of energy we can get, especially to keep the hydroponics farm going, not only because that produces food for the colony, but also the ingredients to make chemfuel, which will also play a role in this episode. And the reason for that is our next research project. As many of you have suggested, we will interrupt the research of starflight sensors in favor of transport pods. Once researched and built, those transport pods will allow us to more easily take care of some of the events that have been popping up lately, things like item stashes, trade requests or bandit hideouts. At the moment, all of those would require us to send a caravan out on the ice sheet for several days. Transport pods, on the other hand, would make travel time almost instantaneous. With only 2,000 points, the project should be quickly researched by Cambia, and once he's finished, we'll talk a bit more about how to use them. For now, Antonio has planted one more round of rice, and now that he's done, we can begin our next small building project. For that purpose, we will carve out another small room next to our storage room, a room that is also conveniently placed closely to our chemfuel generator. Up until this point, we have been producing and storing chemfuel inside of our main storage room, which is admittedly a bit of a risky thing to do. As you can imagine, chemfuel is highly explosive, and should a fire break out inside of the storage room, this could lead to a catastrophic turn of events. And for that reason, we will now move production and storage of the chemfuel over to a separate area, one that is protected on all sides by fireproof stone. So should the worst happen, we could in theory let the entire room burn out, but compared to what could potentially happen inside of our storage room, that would still be much less of a disaster. Since we also want to smooth the stone floor for beauty purposes, the whole project of course takes a while, but after a good day of work we can put the refinery in, and with a long winter ahead of us we can also immediately start making more chemfuel. The fresh produce then gets put into the new stockpile. The rest that we still have inside of our main storage room will also be brought there in just a moment, and with that the first small project of the episode is completed. Up next, we can now have Cobra make some more pemmican for the huskies, and once he's done, we can continue beautifying the base here and there. We're not going to do anything crazy here, we'll just smooth a few walls, which should make our base's main corridor a bit more pleasant to look at. While we do so, we also have the first event of today's episode, and it's not a good one. Luckily though, the flash storm here is far away on the other side of the map, and will therefore not have any negative effects on our small colony. Just a short while later, it has also moved on again, and so we can send Antonio out to collect some marble. We have a big marble structure over to the east of our base. Don't worry though, it is not an ancient danger, so we can safely deconstruct it to gain some valuable materials. Marble is very valuable because of its high beauty rating, and the amount we can get here should be enough for at least one small statue. Now, the area also still has a floor that we can deconstruct for extra materials, but for now, while it is nighttime and our sun lamp is not consuming any power, let's once again fire up the refinery and make some more chemfuel. At the moment, I think we have more than enough meat to feed our colonists without having to rely on rice. The huskies could also eat some of the human corpses we have piling up, so in short, we don't desperately need the rice to get through the winter. Chemfuel, on the other hand, will be in high demand shortly, because transport pods don't work without it. Now, the next rice harvest is quickly brought in, and at this point we will also prevent Antonio from sowing out any new plants. Instead, we shut down the entire farm, the 2 heaters, hydroponics basins, and also the sun lamp. That frees up a lot of electricity, but that is not the main reason we're doing it. Instead, our farming area is due for an overhaul, and that is going to be one of our next projects. However, before we can start working on that, Cambia finishes the research of transport pods. That means we can now build transport pod launchers and the pods to go along with them, and that will drastically increase our mobility and flexibility when it comes to traveling. Now, I think it's sensible to build a setup for at least 2 transport pods. A single one would only be able to carry 1 single colonist, and especially when things are about to end up in a fight, 2 colonists are better to have than 1. However, to construct the entire setup, we now need a healthy amount of steel. 220 units to be exact, to go along with 4 components. That will be enough to build 2 transport pods and the corresponding launchers. So we'll have Cambia do some smelting, but we'll also take a different approach, as we now deconstruct 3 of our 5 solar panels. Not only is their power output fairly limited for half of the year, but for our farming expansion project they are in the way regardless, so we might as well already deconstruct them now. The 2 pod launchers will then be built opposite to each other, directly next to our small chemfuel storage room, and while we're putting down the blueprints, we have a transport pod crash on our map. Inside, the 18-year-old space refugee Shinichi, but looking at his stats, there is nothing terribly intriguing about him. Yes, he has no incapabilities and his traits aren't bad either, but we have just recruited our 3rd colonist in the last episode, and so far we have not really been able to judge what kind of effect that has on raids or other threats. So unless we find a 4th colonist that we simply cannot refuse, we will remain selective as usual. Meanwhile, back inside of the base, Cobra has constructed both pod launchers. Now the only thing missing are the actual pods themselves. Those pods, by the way, are one-use items. Once they're fired, you have to build a new one. The launchers, on the other hand, can be used again and again. That is of course not mentioning how your colonists actually get back from the location that you sent them to, but we'll talk a bit more about that when it becomes relevant. One very important thing here, since we don't really have chemfuel to spare, I prefer to set the launcher's target fuel level to 0 unless I know exactly where I want to send them. As I mentioned, to actually fire the pods, the launchers need to be fueled, and the fuel level dictates how far the pod can be launched. More fuel equals more distance, and the launchers will be fueled automatically. In our case though, we neither have pods nor a destination yet, so we'll leave the launchers empty for the moment and save up the fuel for when we need it. And here we are now with the setup completed. In theory, we could now fire 2 of our colonists a good distance across the ice sheet. However, we will not be doing that just yet. Instead, we will get Cambia back to the research bench, where he can now continue researching starflight sensors, while Antonio already begins digging out what will eventually be our new and expanded farm area. As you might be aware, our sun lamp has a certain radius in which it emits bright light. Currently, we're not really using that radius effectively, as it is much bigger than the small hydroponics farm we have currently built. Now the new setup here is planning to change that by building a room that is just big enough so that the sun lamp can reach every last corner. Still, we want to keep this room as small as possible while not limiting the radius of the sun lamp, and that is because of temperature management. Obviously, the smaller the room is, the easier it will be to keep it warm, and therefore the less energy we will have to expend to achieve comfortable growing temperatures. Using double walls and doors, our 2 heaters should still be enough, especially considering that the geothermal generator also gives us some heat. However, if we were to build a significantly bigger room, we would probably also have to construct an additional heater or 2. Now, this setup unfortunately also comes with the downside of blocking one of our existing wind turbines. That is not a big problem since we can simply move it 1 tile over, but to get that over with we need to deconstruct the old one and then build a new one, which is of course consuming a few precious resources. Still, this new setup will likely keep us going for the foreseeable future, so the wind turbine's new location should be relatively permanent. Meanwhile, the interior of our new farm is coming along nicely. The area is already fully mined out and surrounded by double walls, so now begins the tedious part, and that is smoothing the floor. Of course, the farm will never be a terribly beautiful place, but at the same time I also don't think we need to make it hideous on purpose, especially not if one of our colonists is going to spend significant time here. Since this will take a while, I have also pulled Cambier off of researching duties for the moment. After all, he is by far the fastest guy for the job. While the colonists are still smoothing, we then have the next event, and once again it is one that will take us to the world map. We can see here that pirates from the Falcon Man are holding a prisoner who would be willing to join us if we rescue her, and rescuing her should actually not be too hard as only a single colonist guards the prison. At the same time though, we of course don't know anything about the person we would be rescuing, so I would actually say the risk lies largely in that fact. Looking at the world map then reveals the location to be actually as close by as it can be, only a single tile away, so I would say that is something that we should at least check out once our building projects are finished. And thanks to the close proximity here, we would not even need the pod launchers for it. Back in the base, the flooring work has just been finished as we once again get contacted with a cry for help. This time the guy is injured and not imprisoned, but if we take care of his troubles, he would also be willing to join us. The outpost seems a bit more heavily guarded with 4 enemies, but all in all that certainly does not sound impossible. Looking at the map, we can once again see the location is very close by, and we can also get a good overview of what we actually have available at the moment, which would actually be 5 different locations. The settlement of Gutra Mountains still has a trade request, I believe. Then we just received 2 rescue missions in close vicinity. We also still have the item stash holding a Resurrector mech serum, and a bit further away we have a pirate outpost with 5 enemies, which the Blue Rock Nation wants us to destroy in exchange for an orbital power beam. So you can see lots of options, none of which we will take right at this moment though. Back inside of the base again, we can now finally start moving things around a bit. Now, as far as I know, with clever placement it is possible to fit up to 24 hydroponics basins around a single sun lamp, which would be more than 3 times the amount we currently have. Now, since I want to keep that small battery switch for the turrets in place, the number will be 23 for us, which is still much more than we need at the moment, and also much more than our power grid can realistically support. Still, we can at least somewhat increase our growing capacity. The hydroponics basins only consume 70 watts of electricity, so the upkeep is low and the sun lamp needs to work at full power regardless. Before we can start planting though, we need to close the doors and turn the heaters back on, because after a lengthy building process we now need to get the room back up to temperature. With outside temperatures of -60 to -70 degrees Celsius, that will likely take a few hours, but that gives us enough time to take care of a few other tasks. For example, we can haul the corpse of Shinichi back to the base. Unsurprisingly, his injuries were too severe to make it off the ice sheet alive. After a bit of husky training, hauling and cleaning, we can then also make some more steel with Cobra, because at the moment our reserves are fairly limited, and should we have to rebuild traps in a hurry, we might be in a tough spot. After a few hours then the work is done and the farming area has also sufficiently heated up, so let's start planting. And we are in fact making the switch from rice over to potatoes this time, and I'll try to explain the reason behind it shortly, but I will also leave a link to a much more extensive Reddit post in the description below, where you can read up on all the numbers in detail. The main takeaway is that while rice grows a lot faster than potatoes, those short growing cycles also require your colonists to spend a lot more time harvesting and resowing. There are other factors that play a role, such as power consumption and the availability of space, but in general, for a colony like ours that has very few actual colonists, minimizing work is very important, and growing potatoes will do exactly that. Now, of course, due to the longer growing cycles, we also have a bit more risks, and losing an entire potato harvest is potentially a lot more devastating than losing a rice harvest. Still, I am willing to give it a try. At the moment, we don't have food problems by any means, and if it doesn't work out, we can simply switch back to rice. At the moment though, the numbers look intriguing, so I am more than willing to give it a try. Time to obtain a bit more marble now. We have another small marble structure right outside of our base, and before it gets damaged or destroyed in a firefight, we might as well deconstruct it. We can also remove the floor for a few additional blocks. All in all, definitely a convenient way to obtain some sculpting materials. After a bit more smelting, we then send Antonio out to do the same with the marble structure we deconstructed earlier. However, that mission has to be cut short as we have a poison ship coming in. I think we have dealt with a psychic ship before, but not with a poison ship. In general though, the strategy is not much different, and we should also take care of this as soon as possible. Like the name suggests, the poison ship poisons the ground around it, making it unable to bear crops or any other sort of flora. Admittedly, out on the ice sheet that is not as big of a concern, however the area will steadily expand and could also eventually reach our base. As you can see, the approach here is very straightforward and the same we already used with the psychic ship before. We will simply fire our mortar at the ship. The first hit causes the enemies to come outside, and after 2 or 3 hits they will eventually engage the source of the mortar fire, which is obviously our base. And especially considering the high number of scythers and lances inside, that is exactly what we want them to do, because our traps will make quick work of those enemies. The centipede will likely take a while longer to kill, but we still have our turrets as backup, and luckily there is only one. And here we are, the first 5 mechanoids are down already, now only the centipede remains. With the enemies no longer protecting the ship, I have also stopped firing the mortar gun. Everything from this point onwards would simply be a waste of mortar shells, because we could also just take one of our colonists to destroy the ship with his gun. Now, just to be safe, I have also turned the turrets back on, but I hope the traps will suffice. In retrospect, it might have actually been smart to open up one of the doors to save some traps here. That would have allowed the centipede to enter the base, but in all likelihood we would have still been able to kill it, and that way we might have saved a number of traps. Well, it's too late for that now, the centipede is down. I will try to keep it in mind for next time though. In any case, we have now successfully defeated another raid and can send Cobra out to deal with the poison ship for good. Conveniently enough, this also gives us a good amount of steel as well as plasteel and components, and considering the number of traps we have to rebuild, that is probably a good thing. By the way, it was suggested in the comments of one of the last episodes to switch from steel traps to sandstone traps, but at this point I'm still unsure of whether or not that's a good idea. Yes, sandstone is of course abundantly available on this map, but compared to steel deadfall traps, those made out of sandstone take a whole lot longer to be constructed. So in the end I'm not sure if it's worth making the switch, simply because it would take up too much of our colonists' time. Fairly late in the episode then we have our very first trader arrive, so as always we'll have a quick look at what they have for sale. Unfortunately not much that we could use at this point. We can however sell the Psychi tea we made last episode, and that makes us a nice profit of just over 100 silver. With a whole lot of fresh mechanoid corpses inside of our storage room, we can now also start disassembling them. That will give us even more steel and we can definitely use it. Antonio, meanwhile, can finally finish what he started before the poison ship arrived. Removing the stone floor here reveals a ton of marble, and it would be a shame if we left that out in the open. Unfortunately, we are also not getting away without another problem. It seems like our decision to switch over to potatoes is being punished almost immediately, as a blight has now infested about half of our crops. And so we now have no other choice but to cut the infested plants away. That's the only way to make sure the blight does not spread. On the bright side, Cambia has now finished the research of starflight sensors, and that leaves only one more research project to be completed until we can finally build our spaceship. So let's start working on that immediately, but don't worry, the road between completing all 5 research projects and eventually launching the spaceship, that will still be a very long one. Still, for today's episode, I would say we have reached a good point to make the cut. Antonio has settled in nicely, we have some transport pods now, we have also put another lengthy research project behind us, and our hydroponics farm has seen a sizable upgrade. In the next episode we will hopefully bring in our first potato harvest and make some more chemfuel, and then we should also be able to launch our 2 transport pods for the first time. And at this point I want to know, where would you like to drop? Like I mentioned earlier, we have several targets available. We could either rescue an injured colonist surrounded by 4 enemies, we could also free a prisoner defended by only 1 enemy, and for that we wouldn't even need the drop pods, or we could try to take on 6 enemies to get our hands on a Resurrector mech serum, or we could attempt our luck with 5 enemies and maybe receive an orbital power beam targeter as a reward. Let me know what you would prefer in the comments below, and as always, if you enjoyed the episode, then I would be happy if you could leave a thumbs up. For today's outro, please enjoy this short clip of Manta, provided to us by Patreon Ilka Savilampi. Manta has appeared in the series before and will hopefully be a good luck charm for many more episodes to come. And that's it from my part, you know the rest, subscribe or support me on Patreon if you want to, and I can say thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.